Hey guys! Today I'm going to share with you an impressive story full of mystery. The account of a woman who went through a near-death experience in 2004 and received a revelation about a transformative event that is about to happen in January 2025. It's a story exciting that will make you reflect on life, spirituality, and what's to come. Before you start, comment here from which city you are watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more content like this. Let's explore this incredible journey together. My name is Cassiopeia Winters, but I've always been Cassie. I grew up believing that my name carried something special, an echo of distant stars and galaxies. But in 2004, everything about me was so faded that even my name felt heavy. I was 36 years old and lived in a simple house in Sedona, Arizona. Despite the beauty of the Red Rock Mountains that surrounded the city, my world was gray. I had been married to Michael Carter for almost 10 years. When we met, he was the kind of man who seemed solid, like an anchor. I thought he would keep me safe, but over the years, I realized that solidity hid an inability to connect, to really see myself. He closed himself off from work, numbers and reports. When I tried to talk about my pain, he would simply remain silent, as if he didn't know what to make of my words. In the summer of 2004, my life seemed to have turned into a whirlwind of emptiness and exhaustion. I had started to feel constant pain in my chest. Sometimes my heart felt like it wanted to come out of my chest. Other times it plodded along like a slow, uneven drum. I went to doctors, but none of them found anything concrete. One night, the weight of everything became unbearable. Michael was in the office, and I was alone in the living room, looking at an old photo of us. It was 1996. On our honeymoon, we were facing the Grand Canyon, and I was smiling as if nothing could hurt me. I remembered how I believed in happiness back then. Holding the photo in my hands, I felt a sob escape. I sat on the couch, with my head in my hands. Tears streamed down my face, and my breath came in short gasps. My heart was beating like a mismatched drum, and for a moment I thought maybe it would just stop. The idea didn't scare me. In fact, it felt like a relief. I closed my eyes and spoke, in a hoarse whisper, "God, I can't take it anymore. Please, take me." It was a prayer, but also a surrender. I didn't want to fight anymore. I just wanted the pain to end. I don't know how long I stayed there. Everything seemed quiet, as if the world had stopped. I could hear the sound of the clock on the wall, the ticking seeming to mock my plea. Shortly afterwards, Michael entered the room. He stopped halfway when he saw me. For the first time in a long time, he didn't seem like the stoic man I knew. There was something in his eyes, perhaps fear. He came to me, kneeling beside me. "Cassie, what's going on?" He touched my hand, and his voice broke. I couldn't answer. I just looked at him with teary eyes. He looked lost, but he stood there, holding my hand as if he feared I would disappear. It was the last thing I remember before everything changed. When everything changed, it was as if the world around me had stopped existing. My heart seemed to have given up fighting, but my conscience continued. I felt something strange, a lightness, as if my soul was letting go, escaping the weight of my physical body. It wasn't painful, on the contrary. It was as if I was freeing myself from an invisible prison that I didn't even know how to carry. I opened my eyes, or at least I had the sensation of opening them, but what I saw was something impossible. I was looking at myself, lying on the couch, motionless. My face was pale, and Michael was still holding my hand, mumbling something I couldn't immediately understand. He looked desperate, an expression I had never seen before. "Cassie, Cassie, stay with me," he whispered, almost like a prayer. It was strange seeing him like that. For so many years, he had been a distant figure, someone who seemed incapable of showing emotion. But now, kneeling beside me, his eyes were filled with tears. That sight should have moved me, but I felt neither sadness nor compassion. In fact, I felt nothing but peace. I looked around the room, and everything looked the same, but different at the same time. The colors were slightly distorted, as if a veil of light covered everything. I didn't need long to understand. I was no longer in my body. There was a moment of hesitation, a part of me trying to rationalize what was happening. Was I dead? Was that it? But before I could get lost in thought, a warm sensation washed over me, and an invisible force began to pull me upward. I looked at the ceiling of the room, but it was no longer there. Instead, an infinite space opened up, filled with a soft and welcoming light. A tunnel began to form, as if white clouds were spinning and spiraling. The light at the end was irresistible, and I felt my entire being being drawn towards it. As I climbed, I took one last look at the scene below. I saw Michael still kneeling, with his hands on my face. He was praying. That man, who so often seemed oblivious to everything, now seemed broken, lost in silent despair. For a brief moment, I felt the urge to reach out to him, to tell him everything was okay, but the force pulling me was stronger, and soon the vision disappeared. Upon entering the tunnel, the feeling of freedom was overwhelming. There was no more pain, no fear, no doubt. It was as if I had finally let go of all the chains that held me back. My breathing was no longer necessary, and I realized that the concept of body no longer made sense. I floated through the tunnel, feeling enveloped by an energy of unconditional love. There was a sound all around me, a melody that was not played by instruments, but seemed to arise from every particle of light. It was as if the universe itself was welcoming me, whispering that I was welcome. When I reached the end of the tunnel, everything became even brighter. There was a presence waiting for me, but I still couldn't see it clearly. I just knew that what was coming would be extraordinary. When I emerged from the tunnel, I was overcome by an indescribable feeling of peace. The light around me was soft, but intense enough to fill every part of me. There was a light that didn't hurt the eyes, just illuminated everything, as if it was showing the world as it should be. And in the center of that light, 3 figures began to take shape. They were not human in the traditional sense. Their silhouettes were tall and slender, surrounded by a radiant aura that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Each of the angels had wings that glowed in a unique way, the first with shining silver wings, the second with golden wings that seemed to be made of sunbeams, and the third with pink wings that emanated a comforting warmth. I was motionless, not because I was afraid, but because the grandeur of their presence left me speechless. The silver-winged angel was the first to speak. His voice was not just heard, it was felt in my heart, as if it carried the weight of infinite wisdom. "Cassie," he said, with a serenity that passed through me like a gentle wind, "you are here to learn and to remember who you really are." As he spoke, I felt as if every word resonated deeply within my soul. They weren't just sounds, but truths that I already knew, in some way, but had forgotten throughout my life. The golden-winged angel took a step forward. His presence was more intense, almost as if he carried the weight of courage in his essence. He reached out a hand towards me, but didn't touch me. Just that gesture made me feel a strength that had long since disappeared from me. "Take courage, Cassie," he said, his voice firm but full of compassion. "You are not alone. Never was." Those words hit me like thunder. Wasn't I alone? How could this be true? For years, I felt like I carried the entire world alone, like no one was there to help me. But somehow, the certainty in his voice was undeniable. Then the third angel approached. Her pink wings radiated heat, and her presence was like a hug in the form of light. Before he spoke, tears started streaming down my face, not tears of sadness, but of relief, as if I was finally letting go of a burden that crushed me. "Unconditional love," he said, with a sweetness that seemed to encompass everything around me. "This is the most precious gift you have, and he was always inside you." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. For so long, I felt empty, unable to love or be loved. But there, in that moment, his words ignited something in me, something I didn't know still existed. The 3 angels stood side by side, and their lights began to shine even more brightly. I felt like my heart was opening, taking in everything they were telling me. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared. The light emanating from the angels began to slowly dim, and the atmosphere around me changed abruptly. Instead of the heavenly peace I had felt moments before, I was overcome with a growing sense of discomfort. I looked around, but there was no longer that radiant light. Now I was in a dark and oppressive place. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and there was a damp smell that seemed to penetrate my skin. The ground beneath my feet was viscous and uneven, and a thick fog enveloped me, obscuring any vision beyond a few steps ahead. The darkness wasn't just visual. It was as if he had a life of his own, clinging to me, whispering doubts and fears that I thought I had overcome. "Where am I?" my voice echoed, but there was no immediate response. Soon, I realized that I was not alone. Shadowy shapes began to move at the edge of my field of vision. They had no faces or defined shapes, just shadows that writhed in an unsettling way. One of them approached, and I felt something I will never forget, the crushing weight of despair. It was as if the presence of these shadows was fueled by pain and hopelessness. I started to back away, but it seemed like every step back took me deeper into that dark abyss. My heart, which had previously been at peace, was now racing, as if it was trying to escape from my chest. I looked up, searching for any trace of light, but the sky was just an expanse of endless darkness. It was then that I heard a soft but firm voice inside me. It wasn't an external voice, but something that seemed to come directly from my soul. "Cuts." At first, I hesitated. It was hard to believe that praying would make any difference in that place, but at the same time, there was nothing else I could do. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the shadows that were now approaching, and began to mutter a prayer. "God, please get me out of here. Don't leave me trapped in this place." My words came out hesitantly at first, but as I continued, my voice gained strength. I repeated the words like a mantra, focusing all my energy on each syllable. The shadows began to retreat, as if something invisible was repelling them. The ground beneath my feet seemed to firm up, and for the first time I felt like there might be a way out. Then, in the midst of that darkness, a soft light began to shine. It grew slowly, pushing away the mist and shadows until a figure emerged. He didn't need to say his name. I knew who he was. His presence was unmistakable, radiating love and compassion in a way I had never experienced before. It was Jesus. He walked towards me, the light around him illuminating everything around him. When he approached, I fell to my knees, not out of fear, but out of pure reverence. He reached out his hand, and when he touched my shoulder, all the fear and despair disappeared. "You don't belong here," he said, with a voice that seemed to contain the entire universe. But I needed to understand what it means to lose yourself from the light. Tears streamed down my face as he helped me up. The light around him intensified, and the darkness began to disappear completely. In an instant, I was enveloped by a glow so strong that I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, I was no longer in that dark dimension. What I saw in front of me was something beyond any earthly description. Paradise. When the intense light finally subsided, I opened my eyes and saw a place of indescribable beauty. What was before me was more than an idyllic setting. It was as if each element there had its own essence, pulsing life and love. The sky was such a deep, vibrant blue that it seemed almost alive. Flakes of cloud floated lazily, and the warm, golden sunlight illuminated everything with a softness I had never experienced. The trees, tall and majestic, had leaves that seemed to be made of crystals. When the wind passed through them, they not only moved, but created a delicate melody, like bells ringing in the distance. The ground was covered in flowers that I had never seen before. They glowed with colors impossible to describe, shades of purple, blue, and gold that transcended the earthly palette. I walked slowly, my bare feet touching grass so soft it felt like a silk carpet. The air was filled with a heavenly fragrance, a mix of flowers, honey, and something sweet I couldn't identify. Each breath seemed to fill me with renewing energy, as if the air itself were a gift. On the horizon, I noticed figures approaching. My heart raced, not out of fear, but out of an emotion growing inside me. As they got closer, I recognized faces I hadn't seen in years. At their head was my grandfather, Henry, who had passed away when I was just 8 years old. "Cassie, my girl," he said, opening his arms. His voice was warm and filled with love. I ran to him and threw myself into his embrace, feeling a comfort I didn't know I needed. It was as if time didn't exist, as if all the years of separation were erased in that instant. "I thought about you so much, Grandpa," I murmured, tears streaming down my face. He smiled, running his hand through my hair like he did when I was a kid. "I've always been here, Cassie," he replied. We never really left. We just changed places. Behind him, more familiar faces began to appear. I saw my grandmother, uncles, and even childhood friends who had left too soon. Each one hugged me, sharing an indescribable warmth. It was as if an invisible and eternal connection united us, transcending time and space. While I was still caught up in the joy of that reunion, I heard music that seemed to come from all directions. It was a soft, angelic melody, something I had never heard before, but it felt strangely familiar. When I looked up, I saw luminous figures hovering in the sky, singing with voices that touched my soul directly. This is the place where all souls connect, said my grandfather, gesturing to the paradise around us. It's where we find true peace and understand what it means to be complete. It was then that I realized that, despite the peace I felt, a part of me knew that this was not definitive, as if that moment was a glimpse, a promise of what was yet to come. I felt a slight sadness at the thought of returning, but my grandfather held my hands and looked into my eyes. You haven't finished your journey yet, Cassie. There's something you need to do before you come back here. When I tried to ask what he meant, a presence began to form beside me. It was unlike anything I had felt before. The energy was so pure, so enveloping, that it brought me to my knees. There was no doubt. It was God. You're going to see something important now, Cassie, he said, without needing to move his lips. His voice reverberated inside me, bringing a mixture of love, peace, and power. Pay attention, because what I'm going to show you is essential for what's to come. Before I could respond, a new vision began to form before me. The paradisiacal landscape around me began to slowly disappear, as if dissolving into a bright white light. I was enveloped by this luminosity, and, for a moment, it seemed as if time and space had ceased to exist. I felt an indescribable calm, but at the same time, a growing tension, as if something important was about to be revealed. As the light began to fade, I saw before me a new vision. He was standing in a vast, open field covered in lush green grass. The sky above was not the same serene sky as paradise. It was in constant motion, pulsing with vivid colors that changed and danced like waves of energy. It was so magnificent that I was mesmerized. Suddenly, points of light began to appear in the sky, small at first, but they quickly multiplied and grew in intensity. They were like floating orbs, glowing in a variety of colors: blue, gold, white, and even shades of pink and purple. It was as if the sky itself was alive, communicating in a light show. As I watched, I realized I was not alone. Human figures started to appear around me. Men, women, and children, of different ages, cultures, and backgrounds, were all looking up at the sky, just like me. They didn't seem afraid. On the contrary, there was a sense of awe and reverence on their faces. "What is that?" I asked, without directing the question to anyone in particular. A soft, familiar voice responded from beside me. It was the angel with silver wings, who had accompanied me before. "This is the beginning of a new era," he said, his tone calm but full of meaning. "It's a call to humanity, an invitation to return to the essence of divine connection, to the unity that has been forgotten." As he spoke, the scene before me changed. I saw cities around the world: New York, Paris, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro. In each place, people took to the streets, pointing to the sky as glowing orbs appeared above them. Some people were crying, others were smiling, but they all seemed to feel the same thing: a divine presence that could not be denied. "This event will take place on January 15th, 2025, continued the angel. "It will be a day of awakening for many, but also a test for others. Not everyone will accept what they see, and not everyone will be ready for the change it will bring." "Change? What kind of change?" I asked, still processing what I was seeing. "Change begins in the heart, Cassie," he replied. "This is a call for humanity to remember love, compassion, and spiritual connection. Those who hear the call will begin to live with more purpose and unity, but those who reject the light will continue on paths of darkness until they are ready to awaken." The view changed again. I saw conflicts and divisions, but I also saw people coming together in gestures of kindness and love. I saw children playing together, families gathered in prayer, and strangers helping each other in times of need. I saw orbs of light descending into places where there was once pain and suffering, bringing peace and healing. "Why am I seeing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What can I do?" The angel placed a hand on my shoulder, his presence radiating tranquility. "You were chosen to remember and share. You don't need to lead large crowds or write books. Your mission is to live with love, be a light to those around you, and remind everyone that the divine is in each of us." My tears began to fall as I took in the weight of those words. It was not a mission of fame or glory, but a simple and deeply meaningful mission, to be a force of love in a world that was about to change. The light around me began to grow again, and the vision slowly faded. Before everything went dark, I heard the angel's voice once again. "Remember, Cassie, love is the answer, and 2025 will be the beginning." And then, I was enveloped by a new sensation, as if I was being pulled back to reality. The light that surrounded me began to dissipate, and with it came a feeling of gravity that pulled me back. It was as if my being was returning to the physical body, but not without resistance. The peace and lightness he had felt in paradise was being replaced by something heavier, more earthly. I felt my heart beat again, slowly at first, but increasingly stronger. My eyes opened with difficulty, and the first thing I saw was Michael's face. He was kneeling next to me, holding my hand tightly, as if he was afraid to let go. His eyes were red, full of tears. For a moment, he looked so vulnerable that I barely recognized the man who had always been so controlled and distant. "Cassie?" His voice shook as he called my name. "Are you here? Please say something." I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry, and my body felt heavy, as if it had been put back together in a hurry. Then, with effort, I managed to mutter, "I'm here, Michael." He closed his eyes and let out a deep sigh, as if he had been holding his breath this entire time. Without saying anything, he pulled me into a tight hug. As surprising as that gesture was coming from him, I couldn't resist. I could feel the sincerity in his touch, the real fear of losing me. I thought you were gone," he said, his voice muffled as he buried his face in my shoulder. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to comfort him, but another part of me was still trying to process what had just happened. The vision of paradise, the angels, the revelations. Everything seemed so distant now, but at the same time, so vivid. Slowly, Michael helped me sit on the couch. He pulled back just enough to watch me, as if he needed to confirm that I was really there. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I had never noticed before. Regret. "Cassie, I'm so sorry," he began, his voice wavering. "I'm sorry for not being by your side like I should have been. I didn't know how. I didn't know you were suffering so much." I watched him for a moment, trying to find the right words. Before that experience, I might have exploded in anger or hurt, but something in me had changed. It was no longer about blaming or carrying resentment. It was about finding peace inside and outside of myself. "Michael, it's not your fault," I replied, with a calm that surprised me. I also walked away. Maybe none of us knew how to truly connect. He nodded slowly, as if processing my words. For a few minutes, we were silent, just looking at each other. The weight of that moment was profound, but there was also something liberating about it. Eventually, he asked, "What happened to you, Cassie? For a moment, you weren't here anymore. It was like you were gone." I hesitated, not knowing how to explain what I myself barely understood, how to describe paradise, angels, and the dark dimension to someone who would probably never believe. I didn't want to turn it into a discussion about faith or reality. "I don't know for sure, Michael," he finally said, "but what matters is that I came back, and I guess that means I still have something to do here." He didn't press further. He just nodded and held my hand again, as if he needed that touch to make sure I was really there. That night, while Michael slept on the couch next to me, I remained awake, reflecting on everything I had experienced. There was a new clarity within me, a purpose that I hadn't been able to see before. I knew my life would change from that moment on, but I had no idea how. All I knew was that I needed to start living differently, with more intention and more love. I looked out the window at the starry Sedona sky and made a silent promise to myself. I would honor the second chance I was given. The days following my return were strange and introspective. The The world felt the same, but I didn't. Every detail around me seemed charged with meaning. The sunlight breaking through the curtains, the sound of the wind rustling the trees, even the distant murmur of the stream that ran near the house. It was as if I was seeing everything for the first time, with fresh eyes. Michael, perhaps impacted by the experience of nearly losing me, began to act differently. He offered to take a few days off from work, something he had never done before, and he stayed by my side, trying to connect in ways that had previously seemed impossible. Although I appreciated his efforts, something inside me knew that what had changed in me went beyond our marriage. I needed to figure out who I was now and what to do with this new clarity. One morning, I decided to walk to the overlook on the outskirts of Sedona, a place that always brought me a sense of peace. As I climbed the steep path, I felt the lightness of my body, something I hadn't experienced in years. Each step seemed to symbolize something greater, a movement toward a new life. I reached the top, where red and gold rock formations rose majestically against the blue sky. I sat on the edge, looking at the infinite horizon. The words of the angels and Jesus echoed in my mind. You are not alone. Courage, love is the answer. I wondered how to translate those messages into practical actions. It wasn't a matter of becoming a missionary or preaching to others. It was something simpler, but at the same time deeper. I needed to live in a way that every choice reflected love and connection. Maybe it meant being more present to the people around me, even those who seemed distant, like Michael. Maybe it meant accepting my past, forgiving myself, and finding ways to help those who were also lost. As he pondered, an elderly woman approached, carrying a cane and a warm smile. It was common to meet strangers at the lookout, but something about her seemed different, almost familiar. Beautiful place to find clarity, don't you think? She said, sitting next to me without asking permission. Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, I replied, smiling back. Sometimes, clarity doesn't come in big revelations, but in small gestures. Have you ever wondered why you were given a second chance? She looked straight into my eyes, as if she knew exactly what I had been through. I stared at her, surprised by her words. Before he could ask further, she continued, Your presence is important, Cassie. Don't underestimate the impact you can have on the people around you, even in the simplest gestures. Remember, light spreads, even in the smallest flames. Before I could respond, she stood up, waved slightly, and started down the path. Strange as it was, those words seemed to echo directly from what I had experienced in paradise. When I returned home, I started putting small gestures into practice. I called my sister, who I hadn't spoken to in months. I offered help to an elderly neighbor who needed her fence repaired. I made an effort to listen to Michael when he shared something, even if it was small. With each action, I felt as if a new energy was growing inside me. I knew that transformation would not be an instantaneous event, but an ongoing process. The important thing was to walk, step by step, towards a fuller and more connected life. It's strange to think about how much my life has changed since that night in 2004. I'm sitting now, at the end of 2024, reflecting on the last 20 years. The Cassie who started this journey is almost unrecognizable to me now. I was a broken woman, consumed by emptiness and despair. Today, I am someone who has learned to find beauty in simplicity and to live with purpose, even when the answers are unclear. Since that near-death experience, there hasn't been a day that goes by that I don't think about the vision of what's to come. For years, I kept those images with me, pondering their meaning and my role in this great event that was shown to me. The date is engraved in my mind, January 15th, 2025. It's as if every step I've taken since then has been preparing me for this moment. I never spoke openly about the experience to many people. I didn't write books, I didn't give lectures, I didn't seek notoriety. Not because I didn't want to share, but because I always knew that my mission was not great in the eyes of the world. It was simple, almost discreet, living with love, courage, and purpose. Be a silent example. In the years that followed, I applied what I learned in small gestures. I became someone who listens, who is present, who sees beyond words. I relearned how to connect with Michael. Although our marriage did not survive, because deep down we both knew our roles in each other's lives had been fulfilled, we separated respectfully, with understanding. We became friends. This reconnection, even if in another format, was one of the first signs that the change I experienced was not superficial. But the biggest learning was patience. There were times when I wondered if I was really doing what I was supposed to do. There were no grand signs, no divine confirmation that I was on the right path. Sometimes I felt like I was walking in the dark, trusting only that brief vision I received so many years ago. Over the past few months, however, something inside me has started to change. It's hard to describe, but it feels like a kind of upheaval, like the world is getting ready for something. People around me began sharing stories of intense dreams, unexplainable sensations, and a growing desire to find purpose. Even those who previously didn't talk about spirituality or faith started mentioning things that remind me of the vision I had. No matter how subtle it is impossible to ignore. There is an energy in the air, a feeling that something is approaching. I'm not afraid. On the contrary, I am full of hope. The angels said it would be the beginning of a new era, a call to humanity to reconnect with the divine, with love. I believe this with all my being. Now, as I write these words, I feel that my part has been fulfilled thus far. I don't know what exactly will happen on January 15th, 2025. I don't know how or where the orbs of light will appear or how people will react, but I know something will change, something bigger than me, bigger than any of us, and I know I'm ready. I close this report with the expectation that what is to come will be an invitation for all of us, an invitation to love more, forgive more, and find a purpose beyond the material. I'm anxious, not for what I'll see, but for what I'll feel, for confirmation that even in our failures, humanity can still find its way back to the light. If you're reading this, I want you to know that no matter what happens, love will always be the answer. He is the essence of everything, and that's why I'm at peace with what's to come.